There's a lot of social science research that
Right.
reinforces this. Changing your context helps you change your behavior.
Right.
Imagine if there was a bot in that chat and it can kind of like, egg you on, but it just makes the passive dynamic a little bit more active
Right.
to kind of say, hey, and remind you where your goals are and things like that. And I think these are not technically complex, and you could see them becoming ubiquitous, right? These
Yeah.
little sort of voices that are just like trying to nudge you in a specific
Right.
direction.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 20,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Do you manage your own IT for distributed teams in Asia? You know how painful it is. Asavol helps your in-house team by taking tough tasks off their hands and giving them the tools to manage IT effectively. Get help across 8 countries in Asia Pacific, which includes onboarding, procurement, device management, real-time IT support, offboarding, and more. Gain full control of all your IT infrastructure in one place with our state-of-the-art platform. Check out Asavol, ESEVEL.com, and get a demo today. Use our referral code BRAVE for 3 months free. Terms and conditions apply. Hey, Shiyan, party time.
Yeah, we're partying.
It's like if you just a random conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, she just pulled up a glass of wine and a can of La Croix. There we go. That combo, I guess, is a form of hydration, right?
Yeah, it's always important to stay hydrated. And so I recommend if you're drinking wine, you should also be drinking water. In my case, sparkling water.
Sparkling water. Wow, there we go. So what we wanted to do, a few shout outs. I think a few folks who said hi. They enjoyed the recent episodes. So Shiyan, I think you want to say something to Lena.
What's up, Lena? Lena from Non-Public. They're working on something cool over there. And so wanted to give her a shout out for reaching out. It was funny because I pinged her to be like, we should catch up. And she was like, I feel like I just spoke to you recently. And then she realized, no, she had just been listening to the podcast.
I know. Good, there we
So
go.
we hadn't actually spoken. She had just heard our voices. Same.
It's like my wife receives a podcast episode from me at the end of the day. There we go.
We don't need to talk, sweetheart.
Communication complete, right?
Here are my thoughts from the day. Please listen to this at 2x speed. So actually it's more efficient than actually talking to me.
Oh boy. I don't think it'll go down like a pile of bricks. There we go. David Herg Anderson, thank you for enjoying your run with us and hearing our Family Officers episode. So we are looking forward to your upcoming webinar on startup down rounds. I'm all ears. I think there'll be a really fascinating training that you're holding for the Singapore Venture Capital Association, SVCA. So looking forward to that. I think we got one more shout out from Shireen Escott, who was asking questions about diverse founders. And I think let me just read out exactly what she said. She said, hey, I loved the episode. I felt that there was a lot to learn about the reality of the business. And she felt like there was a part about blind spots that she really appreciated. And yet she was also very thoughtful and asking questions about saying, hey, I'd love to hear more about how diverse founders can improve their chances of success in raising. Shiyan said her friend had all the advantages and she found it so tough. It's even harder when you don't have those advantages. So yeah, Shiyan, I guess that's addressed at you. What's your quick response to that before we get into the rest of the episode?
Yeah, I think to refer back to that episode, we talked about what is it like when the person you're pitching may not necessarily have an intuitive understanding of the problem that you're trying to solve, and how that might lead it to be sort of an easier pass because they're kind of like, I don't really know about this problem. It can't be that big a problem. And I think this applies to all founders, not just diverse founders. And I think part of it is really trying to put your listener into the shoes of your target customer. Walk through that customer journey to give people that virtual sense of what is that pain? When do you feel it? What are your current not so great alternatives.
Mm.
Why is the thing that you are building so much better and so much more compelling to this person? And I think the example that we had given previously was someone who was doing diagnostics through the use of menstrual blood. And there was like both the ick
Mm.
factor and the like, hey, this isn't something I'm like super familiar with. But I think everyone has had an experience with maybe not feeling super well and going to the doctor, and maybe someone not being able to understand
Mm.
how to figure out what's wrong with you, right?
Right.
So, trying to find analogies to help people connect with the problem is important just to make it simpler. It isn't just in sort of ick factor things. I think it also happens in enterprise software where you might not understand the buyer. Why would a compliance person have this problem?
Yeah.
Why would an HR leader have this problem? So I think contextualizing the problem is a really important part of connecting with your audience and helping them see like, hey, I am solving a big problem. And here's some information from customer development that I've done that helps give even more color around what that problem and the size of that problem is, or better yet, why my solution is so compelling.
Yeah, I think it's even more important in the sense that every founder is an outsider fundamentally. Because if you're a founder and you're trying to build something that's going to happen in 10 years of hard work to become a true reality, the truth is you're always an outsider because everybody who's inside doesn't want it to happen at some degree, right? Because change is scary, the future is hard to build. There's a bunch of embedded economic interests that are part of the current reality in terms of incumbency. And so whenever you're trying to build that future, you're always going to be an outsider and you're always going to be like that prophet or that Cassandra in the sense that nobody really wants to believe you. I mean, for my past two companies, when I started out, it was like I got rejected lots of times as well. But I also acknowledge that I worked very hard to create those bridges. My first company, I didn't have some of these logos that I now have. And so I would just be like, oh, okay, these are the other ways I relate to you. And these are the ways that I will just very explicitly spell it out for you. Whereas I think I have to admit that the second time was a little bit easier because with those badges, I was able to open up the doors relatively easy. That's my personal experience, was like the door got open. And then after that, you still face a pretty tough crowd, honestly, once you're in the conference room. But at least the first door got open, right? And so I think my reflection is that where it shows up a lot. I think if you're a diverse founder, is that it's really that first gate you even get that conversation going, right? And so I think my perspective is you have to leverage your network as much as possible, a warm introduction. Because I think diversity is always like a certain plane. So whether it's a gender or a single plane. But what are the other ways you connect? Do you connect based on school? Do you connect based on prior industry of expertise? Do you connect based on hobby? Do you connect based on a warm connection? So really being very super specific to be like, okay, I'm different from this person in one or two different planes, which is most people, right? I mean, we all differ. I differ from you, Shiyan, in the sense that I'm male, you're female, you're cool, I'm super cool, and so forth.
I've never been cool in my life.
Okay, all right,
So
all right. We're both equally fine.
here's
This is
where we
similarity. We're
differ.
both nerds who are trying to be cool. Say something, say we're cool. Okay, great.
I'm not trying to be cool, man.
You're not trying
I'm
to be cool.
embracing
Okay,
I'm
you're a nerd
embracing
who's
my
not
lack
never
of
cool,
yeah.
and I'm a nerd who's trying to be cool. There we go.
Yeah.
But I think finding those planes is going to be those key moments. And I think that helps you get the door open. And I think the reality is that door, wherever you are, and you could be a Southeast Asian founder trying to open up doors in the US. That's also always hard. You're an American founder trying to build doors in Southeast Asia. That's also tough as well. Anyway, so that's my quick response to that listener question.
This reminds me of trying to get through US immigration, trying to keep the door closed.
Yeah.
So whenever I land in the US, I try to wear something that has a local sports team logo on it. I'm trying to communicate to the border control
Yeah.
official that I'm just like him. I
Yeah.
too am a Warriors fan.
Ah,
You know,
interesting.
I like basketball. I try to blend in, and
Uh.
so they will quickly stamp my passport and wave me through instead of putting me into secondary inspection and making my life very difficult. So
This is
I
the
think this
exact-
applies in a lot of
Yeah.
different places, right? Which is like, what is the commonality you can connect with someone on, and how do you signal to them that we're all on the same team, man? We love Steph Curry. Who doesn't?
So there's a bunch of news that was happening in Southeast Asia that we felt had to be mentioned, obviously, for those who are curious about Southeast Asia. I think the first piece of news was that Cambodia Prime Minister Hun Sen is going to step down and is handing over power to his son, Hun Manet. So that's a big one that happened this past week. And the second one, of course, is that Thaksin, the Thai billionaire and former leader, is going to return in August after 15 years of exile. And so those are two very big pieces of news. I think this is pretty important because these are obviously important countries in Southeast Asia. And I think folks are really thinking through about how these political transitions are really important because they are part of the political stability, right? And you can only build an economy based on political stability. And then you can only build technology and startups and venture capital that have a 10-year horizon based on that overall economic stability. So I think there's a little bit of a step ladder here that you got to have political stability at some level in order for the future to be built on those stacks. So yeah, those are my thoughts. And now we go to our next stage. I think we wanted to talk a little bit about requests for startups. I think you and I had a bunch of ideas that we wanted to brainstorm and think of. So I put together a little note list of
Oh,
ideas that
good. What do you got? I can't
what you
wait.
got. You got some, right? I'm sure.
I got a list, but you go first.
I go first. I'll go first. Okay. Okay. Idea one. Okay.
And
I'll
just to
do
be
it.
clear, is
Yeah.
this ideas you feel have business merit or just things you wish existed? Because those are not necessarily the same thing.
I mean, if you wish something exists, it implies that a consumer like me wants it. And the question that you have to believe is how much of a weirdo do you think I am? Is this a generalizable problem to a
Yeah.
large enough segment that has some business merit? It may not be a VC backable merit, but
Yeah,
some
yeah.
kind of business merit. Unless you're going to say like this is a very idiosyncratic request that Jeremy has.
Well, no, there could be other things. Even if
Yeah.
it's something a consumer wants, it's like too expensive to acquire these consumers. Or there's just not enough margin to do
Oh,
the
yeah.
thing. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of
I
other
don't know.
reasons other than you're a weirdo, which
Yeah,
we can
yeah, yeah.
debate separately.
Separately, extensively for the entire hour. There we go. Okay, so why don't we say, let's just throw them out. Nobody wants to hear about this theoretical framework about this. I'll throw out one. So I think what's interesting is that we have lots of generative AI models that are all tackling different languages, right? And LLM models are not AI models, they're just probabilistic language models. And so they require to be trained based on language. And so the first wave were all about English, right? So OpenAI, and obviously that's gone viral. Everybody's using it, at least amongst my friends and colleagues. And then if you take a side step out, then in China, which is I think part of that global decoupling, there is 4 different AI models that raise lots of money to basically build the Mandarin version because of 2 reasons. One, of course, is that Mandarin is a totally separate language that requires very different set of training materials from English because a lot of their stuff, the Chinese internet is actually an order of magnitude smaller than the whole English
Mm-hmm.
universe in terms of
Mm-hmm.
time length, depth, as well as variety because of different countries and so on and so forth. So I think they have to figure out different types of training as well and different kind of parameters and reinforcement training. But also because they're worried, I think rightfully so, that they're not going to have access to the English model in a sense because of that geopolitical tension. Then now actually we're starting to see the European, we have 2 of them, right? We have one for the French that has a European focus, obviously, but it's a French team. And now one is a German team and it's kind of building for the whole of Europe. So I think there's 2 of them. They both raise hundreds of millions of dollars as part of the seed rounds. And that kind of got me thinking a little bit, which is like, okay, what does it look like for Southeast Asia? Because we do have Bahasa, which is about 300 million folks. And then obviously there's some commonalities with Malaysian Bahasa there. And then, of course, there's also Vietnamese, there's also Tagalog. So these are all Southeast Asian languages that, frankly, nobody's going after yet from a model basis. So I think there's an interesting dynamic where at least there's a metaphorical piece you can imagine that somebody could say, like, hey, the open AI for Southeast Asian languages like Indonesia, Vietnamese, Tagalog, which is, I think, a bundle, some synergies based on the end users in terms of what they're going to be using for. So there's some customers bundling that can happen together there. But of
But is that
course,
just like a language translation middleware? Or like if conceptually, if GPT is trained on everything that's on the English internet right now,
right.
is it that we think there are things that exist in other languages that are not in English internet? Or is it just that we think that there are certain idiosyncrasies about how those languages describe certain problems that there needs to be some sort of like translation middleware essentially to the GPT model?
Yeah, I think some approaches, I mean, people in China were complaining that basically they could tell that some of the models, if they couldn't figure it out, they would basically translate the request from Chinese and push it through the English models. And then after that, translate it back to Chinese. And the results was just subpar because imagine it's just like, you're going through 2 versions of that filter as well. So I think people feel like the performance isn't there. And of course, there's also an expense to it. So you're not building the fundamental model reliability at the bottom of it. So that's an interesting dynamic that's there. I mean, so I think it's interesting, right? I mean, poetry would be a good example, right? The different forms of poetry in different cultures is very idiosyncratic. It's not going to be, if you translate a poem and all that stuff, is just not going to work out. So I think that's one of the further edge cases that's there. But also I think in Bahasa for Indonesia, a lot of people are using short forms. So they're using brief abbreviations to represent the whole thing, especially on WhatsApp. And also I think for a lot of emerging countries, a lot of that language is not on the public internet because it's not on websites or MySpace or Reddit. A lot of it is actually in messaging apps, which are all private communication. So again, it's even more invisible for a robot that's scraping the web. So I think there's an interesting dynamic there Could be a party round. Again, I think it would be something that is obviously in terms of race might be an order of magnitude smaller to some extent because again, GDP per capita is different from the Europe and US, so the economic use case is going to be one order of magnitude smaller. But you can imagine that population size does actually make it a compelling size to be like, hey, what does that look like? So like the Grab or Gojek localization of OpenAI. So that's what I'm thinking. That's one idea I have. So yeah.
So are you asking someone to build that? Or you think someone
Why
should
not?
build
Yeah,
that?
I've been asking everybody to build this because I think a lot of AI folks are basically building applications and they are finding some success obviously if you're an English user, but we can't generalize down to SMEs, for example, because they're going to be communicating consumers who are speaking Bahasa, for example, or Vietnamese or Tagalog, right? And so that's something to be aware of. Okay. Shiyan, you have another idea. We kind of go. Otherwise, it's gonna be like one idea show, right? What's your idea?
You're the idea guy, man. I'm just here to drink sparkling water and poke holes. Well, I mean, we put out, I pinged a couple sort of groups just to hear what people wish existed. And I guess what was kind of interesting was that they weren't that crazy. There are like a bunch of requests for things that probably are not that far off. But the challenge is not actually, at least in my mind, the technical execution. The challenge is more like how do you make money and distribution.
Right.
And that I've seen various versions of that, but they've never really taken off because of these distribution or monetization challenges.
Right.
So if you just think about what would make people's lives easier and better, there are a bunch of people who are like, actually just wished I had a personal assistant that worked. Like a virtual personal assistant that worked. And then I asked for examples of what those things might be. It's like, I want them to read my email
Right.
and send responses to things that are like really common requests that I get.
Right. Yeah.
And you're like, that's actually not out of the realm of possibility.
Very
if you
far
think
away.
about that shouldn't be actually that far away. But then you always run into this problem where it's just like, would you really trust your email program to write all of your email? How much control do you want? If it's a really standard thing, it's like, hey, I want to submit a pitch deck, then yeah, you can have an automated response that's like, hey, please submit our form, or like, hey, I'm busy right now, blah, 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 whatever. But most things don't necessarily fall into those standard buckets. And so it's like, how much judgment, how much leeway things do you give? It'd be kind of interesting. But you could imagine something that trained on your responses.
Yeah.
Right? There was sort of like a generic model, and then you plugged it in, and then it looked at what you did over a period of time, and it started trying to train on you. And basically, initially, it would just queue things up, and you would approve them or amend them, and it would learn again, and you kind of keep going through it. But it seems like those things are like possible, but the problem with this is just initially it would be shitty, so people wouldn't pay for it. You need it to become better, but this is like the whole sort of distribution monetization problem. And so it seems like one of those things where like an existing email provider will do it because they already have distribution. So it's like not a great startup kind of thing, right? But yeah, a lot of these ideas were things where you're just like, that's actually not that far off. It probably will exist. I'm not sure a startup is going to do it. It actually seems like an incumbent is better positioned to do some of these things.
Riffing off that, I think there's a version of that has a lot of economic value, and that you just reminded me of. It's basically like an AI version of HubSpot or Pipedrive or some kind of sales dynamic, which is I think the same level, but I think it's much more thinly, which is at the end of the funnel, a sales meet in terms of a contract is signed. And then of course, customer service takes on from there. But all that work is such like all bashed up, right? I mean, you have lead generation, then there's lead qualification, then you got to do the onboarding call, and then you got to do a bunch of emails to schedule stuff, and then you got to go and do the call, and then you got to close, and you go to contract. And I'm like, of course, HubSpot is like looking from a marketing and all-in-one perspective. But I think this HubSpot's design philosophy, rightly so, is called there's a human driving this entire process. Because guess what? We already generated a lot of these communication tools. And so I'm kind of waiting for HubSpot to maybe either implement it, that's one. But it could just be someone else, right? Which is basically saying like, look, you don't need to buy HubSpot or Pipedrive or whatever it is, or Streak CRM. Look, you just want close sales. We have this digital agent that basically is your secretary in terms of user shared or personal assistant. But it was going to help you drive sales, lead generation, typing your parameters, we'll script LinkedIn for you, do everything. Just make it KISS, right? You know what I mean? And I think so many folks that are not company level, you're like a 1-man, 5-man, 10-man sales team, just be like, okay, this is a great way for us to basically double, triple, quadruple productivity. Rather than most CRMs are about trying to avoid losing productivity because you're busy filling out notes on everything. So you could even have like meeting bots. Every salesperson hates writing sales notes. Good, I understand, because you could be selling instead, or you could be doing something else with your life.
But that should already exist, right? You already have the like the recorder, it already summarizes, and you could just insert it straight into the CRM.
Yeah, but then you have to go and you have put it in, and then after you have to go there, Control C, Control V, and then you gotta edit it a little bit, and you gotta press the submit button. Because even the transcription stuff, they don't summarize it, so they just transcribe it. So what I'm trying to say is, I think everyone's just making all these
They're
like
doing it
foundational
now,
things.
though. They're
Yeah,
starting to
starting
do
to.
it now. Have
Starting,
you seen
starting.
Rewind?
Yes, I have seen Rewind. I thought it was pretty cool.
It summarizes meetings, and it's
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish I actually told somebody almost like, I want to say 7 years ago. I literally told someone's asking me about something like transcription, etc. I said, can you just record meeting minutes and just tell me what the to do is? Because we always assign this to either the most junior person who normally does a terrible job at it, or someone like who's kind of like middle to senior who's good enough to do it, but we need their engagement in the conversation and not taking meeting minutes. So I was literally told him, I said, I'll literally pay you like $50 an hour meeting just to get this done because we're having important meetings. Anyway, you have to take my word for it, but I literally told the person that I should have recorded
it
as a request for
exists.
Stardust episode. Now it does.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
exists.
It's amazing.
I
your turn,
actually had the
Shiyan.
first person who actually told me to turn off the recorder. The first person in like 3 years told me to turn off the recorder today.
Well,
Apparently, Citibank does not allow
Yeah.
their employees to be on any recorded calls, and also does not allow them to use ChatGPT. This is what I learned.
Oh, interesting. I mean,
seems
I
limiting.
generally say no to being recorded, actually. I mean,
We're being recorded right now.
because I know we're going to be recorded. But then they're asking me stuff like, okay, we'd like to do a conversation about your financials. Are you okay with being recorded? I'm like, no. I'm just saying, if you can say no to, why would you say yes?
Yeah, totally. But like a standard business meeting,
Yeah, like an internal business meeting. We're talking about stuff. But then, of course, what if you're like business humor? You're joking about A and B and C. I don't know.
I don't know what kind of jokes you're making, man. Better watch out.
Okay, I mean, I love comedy, right? I think the big thing I realized about comedy is that it's always context and audience specific, right? So everything's funny within that time for that audience. But comedy kind of breaks down the moment you get outside that audience or outside the context. And so the problem with recordings is that it's not that you don't have a good conversation with like your 3 people, you're joking about something. Let's say I'm in the army, right? And then I'm like, yeah, I used to have lots of army comedy, right? But I wouldn't really want my bosses, I'm just saying, because like they'll say like, oh, this is what kind of dark humor is this about life and blah blah, wanting to get out and all this other stuff. I'm just giving an example, right? That wouldn't play out well. And you zoom that out outside Singapore, then it's a different form of joke. So I think that's why everything is getting like canceled, right? It's because comedy is about some level of shared understanding of the audience and context, but also some noticing of some absurdity of the outside environment. And that ends up outside environment, the audience changes, right? And so I think from my perspective, that is not about, I don't have an issue being recorded as long as that recording stayed for the 3 of us, for example. But once you scale out to like 1 billion people on TikTok, nothing you say can really pan out.
Aren't we on TikTok, Jeremy? Are we going to
We
get
are on
canceled for
TikTok.
this podcast?
No, we're not going to get canceled on TikTok because we know what we're talking about and people can opt into a conversation or people can opt out of that conversation. They can choose to listen to this on swipe away from us, right? So this is a different context. But I think comedy is always context dependent, right? Yeah. There's a circle of trust. So I think there's lots of things that as all these meetings become transparent, and then of course maybe you're discussing, I'm giving an example, performance reviews. I'm just giving an example, right? So yeah, you can imagine lawsuits happening for that. Right? So what I mean by that is that protected categories. So there's obviously in the US, there's age, gender, so forth, all these other things. But one of the big issues that we saw was that the reason why nobody gives feedback after interview rejection is that people get sued because they say, hey, you said that you're looking for a high energy person based on that feedback, and I am older. And so therefore you're saying that you're discriminating on me based on my energy levels, code for, and so forth. And I think as a result, I think we basically saw the collapse of post-interview feedback effectively because people just say like, hey, we have lawsuits. So you imagine like meetings about performance reviews, those would never be recorded because how do you have a frank conversation where I don't know. I think there's that dynamic of transparency, which is a perfect virtue, but then also there's a trust circle. And that's at some level not the same thing.
Yeah. I don't know. People say crazy stuff. I had a friend get feedback, was like, you seem great, but your lifestyle requirements are too much for us. And like the lifestyle requirement was basically like, I have to pick up my kids from school twice a week.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
not like she didn't want to do work. It's just like, hey, like I have to do this thing and I'm happy to log back in after.
Yeah.
I just thought we were kind of like past that stage where it's basically you can't have a working parent. I mean, that seems like an insane selection criteria.
Yeah, I think it's true. And I think this the thing, right? Is just like there's fair feedback and there's unfair feedback. And I think transparency makes it super clear, but it's not in everybody's interest to make it super clear. Or it could even be misunderstood, right? So I think that's the crux of it. Okay, I think another tool I have would be Figuring out if something is human or bot made. I think I'm starting to see all these images, these texts. And I know it's so hard, but
You
you
want to
ask
know
me
if it
like,
was artisanal,
yeah, was it organically grown by a human? Did somebody sweat and then chuckle to himself like,
handcrafted.
I handcrafted this horrible dad joke pun and I laughed at myself hee ha at my laptop before hitting my submit button instead of like somebody who just automatically generated. Or is this a total bot? Nobody even automatically generated. Is this a bot farming karma, right? On
But
Reddit or
why does
some
that matter?
equivalent.
Why does it matter if it's funny? Why do you care who made it?
I'm an old person. I'm a geriatric millennial who likes my stuff human generated. I don't know. I mean, if you look at your social media feeds as a way just to be entertained, then it doesn't matter whether it's bot generated or human generated. But if you're looking at it as a way to be part of the community, you wouldn't want this to be ghostwritten by somebody else. So if your secretary wrote that email saying, "Oh, I really appreciated your new line of clothing and it was really amazing," it will come across as so much better if it was written by you rather than written by a personal assistant.
Yeah, but you as the recipient, like you got already the good vibes from the message, right?
But that's why people want the signature, right? Somebody wrote handwritten cards. I mean, handwritten cards are a luxury these days. Otherwise, it's just emails and texts. Happy birthday is very different on WhatsApp than you wrote it down. You wrote a whole birthday card.
Yeah, level of effort.
Yeah, and it means more. Like the more busy you are, if you're the president and you wrote a handwritten card, it means a lot more than, for example, Jeremy at the age of 12. Well, actually, Jeremy at the age of 12 was pretty cute, so I think it was worth a lot as well. But I'm just saying, like, to some level, you know that when someone's really busy and they took the time to do that extra human touch, it's meaningful, right?
Yeah. How much would you pay for that service though?
To find out if stuff is real or not. I think, wait, to me, it would be a Chrome extension. It would just be a Chrome extension. I'll pay like
Would you
10
pay?
bucks. Yeah, I'll pay 10 bucks a month. Why not?
All right. You heard
Yeah,
it
I'll pay
here,
10 bucks a
guys.
month.
$120
No, I mean, it's helpful,
a
right?
year.
Okay, there's a great Instagram account I follow. It's like real or not, or some equivalent of it. But basically, it shows what celebrities post on the Instagram of themselves, etc. And then it shows the Getty images, but like public photographers, public domain photographs of them at the same event. And then you can just see the difference. And I just use that to remind myself there's already so much like photoshopping, removing of blemishes, distortions, and all these filters to make. And like there's a lot of really attractive people, both male and female, on the internet all the time. And that Instagram kind of like always fact checks me a little bit, which is like, yeah, guess what? Like I don't need to look like that because it's totally impossible to look like that. But I mean, the truth is, if you go on the internet all the time, is like, your standards get warped, right? Like 80-90% of the images are like that, then you're just like, oh, okay, it's totally normal to have like perfect skin, and then you're like, oh, people have pimples, people have whatever. And he's just like, I mean, I think that's fine. I mean, that's like mild blemishes and mild freckles. Like, I can imagine that, like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's like, okay, that's not even the worst thing I've seen, right? I think the worst thing I've seen is, those waists are like super skinny. I don't know.
That's why I like Zoom. It makes me look better than Google Meet.
How does Google Meet do anything? What are you talking about?
No, Zoom has the correction feature. It makes you look better.
What?
Yeah. You didn't turn it on?
There's a
It's
correction
amazing.
filter?
Yeah.
Wait, what? Okay, wait, I need to check this out. Is it like good correction filter?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
good. This is like, so you're on Zoom all day long and you like look at yourself and then you get up and go to the bathroom and you're like, wait, I look terrible. I don't understand. And you're like, oh, it's the Zoom correction filter. It makes me look better when I'm in meetings.
What? Okay, so tomorrow.
But you know what? Right now here, whoever's watching this, there's no correction filter. This is how we look.
I know we need to complain to the Riverside platform. It's like we need correction filters all the time. We need,
Yeah,
like, makeup.
we need to be improved. The wrinkles, everything, smooth out our skin.
Boy, yeah.
Yeah. So another thing that people sort of asked for, which was just like they wanted a comprehensive view of their finances, and they
Or
wanted
like
to be able to like
yeah. What happened to Mint.com?
they wanted to be able to interrogate it, like ask questions of your data,
Yeah.
without having to do the analysis yourself or having to do a ton of manipulation of the data. So like
Oh, that's true. I like it,
Mint.com
yeah.
was just like, hey, I'm gonna log in and put everything in the same place,
Right.
which was step one. But first of all, it's hard to get aggregation across geographies. So let's say
Right.
you had accounts in different places, that's pretty hard. It's easier
Yeah.
to do in a single
Right.
geography. But then the data itself is not particularly insightful, right? It doesn't really
Yeah,
tell
yeah.
you anything.
Right.
So if you had to take it to the next level, you'd want to be able to talk to it the way you talk to a financial advisor.
Ooh, exactly.
You'd want to be like, hey, given my current spending patterns, how does this set me up for retirement?
Right.
Or like, it seems like we've been spending more on XYZ thing. Like, what's going on there? And it would just tell you.
Yeah.
right? It would basically analyze what was going on and like give you answers to it. Like a personal financial advisor you could interact with, but basically it's just a chat GPT-esque bot sitting on top of your
Yeah.
own personal data that was aggregated across like a bunch of different institutions and geographies. And like the difficulty is also being able to track the cache between everything.
Right. Yeah. That's super fair. And I think that's where some of this generative AI is really helpful as well, because there's a trust component. If you have multiple accounts, etc., you traditionally probably need an agent to support you, right? So some sort of like representative to walk you through, so forth. But there's a privacy component. I'm going to tell them everything. These people tend to be, I wouldn't say fresh graduates, but they're relatively young. These are wealth
Yep.
advisors. And so I think to some extent you could trust an AI a little bit more to some extent, because it's not at least talking to a human who could potentially talk about it over dinner, no matter their NDA, etc. So yeah, that's a really interesting idea. I think that's a good idea, especially because you can do all the things, right? You can look at your property, you can look at your tax rates and how to apply for
Yeah.
tax credit, etc. So this that whole encompassing dynamic, right? Yeah, that's a great idea. Like a real wealth advisor.
Yeah, but on your own data, which is
Yeah,
basically saying like, hey, I'm going to give you all my data and
yeah,
I just want to be able to ask you questions like, hey, am I overspending my budget? If you set your own budget, you say,
yeah,
hey, I only want to spend $500 a month eating out. You could like, halfway through the month be like, hey, how am I doing? Right? For the
yeah.
rest of the month. How am I doing against my budget? I think that would be like a sort of on demand kind of useful intelligence.
Yeah, like it's like basically giving you, it kind of scrapes your credit card statements as well, so you connect it in
Mhm.
automatically, your bank balance, etc. So it's just, it knows your, oh man, this. I've signed up for so many of these personal finance apps in the US and
Yeah,
they're
but they're
disappointed.
shitty.
Yeah,
They're shitty.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Well,
so
it's a
true.
variant.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
variant of a bunch of startups that I've seen, which is like trying to replace the SQL query,
yeah,
right? So it's like the constant challenge of like business analytics teams, right? Is like they're getting questions from all over the business that are like, how is this cohort performing? What was the performance of this marketing campaign? Like, did it actually lead to increase in conversion? Blah blah blah. And then some poor analyst is sitting there like querying the database, and it's like, well, do you need that? Is there a way people use natural language to like query the data set themselves and
right,
self-serve rather
right.
than having to rely on a giant data analytics team to answer some of those questions? And I think that's like the sort of personal finance analog, right? Can I
Yeah.
query my own data?
I think you also do like an idea that came out to me a long time ago was like a self tribal reinforcement, brainwashing. I don't know what you call it.
Sounds
Goal. So,
scary.
sounds scary. I don't know what the right phrase is. It's okay. So for me, when I was like losing weight, I think a big part I had to
Uh,
do was I had to change my tribe, right? And what I mean by that is I had to like, it was a pain in the ass, but basically I subscribed to all these health newsletters, health podcasters, YouTubers. I'm just saying, right? I was like, change my algorithm
are you
in a
listening?
sense, right?
You're listening to Huberman?
A little bit, but only when he's a guest. I don't listen to his like regular stuff. Yeah. So I mean, I think these are all content. So I'm training YouTube. It's like, hey, I'm trying to get healthy, right? I don't want to click on those things, but I click on them anyway, just so that I hope that the signal kind of like, I'm putting like this bat signal in the sky saying like, help, I need Batman to come. And I mean,
Mhm.
Instagram is why I follow these things. I also had unsubscribed from other things, right? And so I think there's a bit of a cultural, tribal dynamic, identity dynamic. And I think to some extent, some diet and nutrition apps do that. They used to do that. I used to sign up for these health apps with these nutritionists, humans who would, you would
Mm.
talk to them about take photos of your food, and then they'll positively reinforce you and say like, great, Jeremy, you did a great choice about that food. I'm just an example, right? But obviously the problem is that it falls apart the moment you get a big giant piece of pizza and you don't take a photo of it because you feel guilty about telling someone about it, and then they don't respond to it because they don't know about it, and blah blah blah, all this stuff, right? So
So how you just wear a camera and it like constantly tracks everything you're doing, so you can't even cheat yourself.
yeah, but it's kind of like similar to a personal finance assistant, but personal health assistant, right? It's like looking at your spend and all these other data sources that would never have been there. And then there's the AI that basically just says like, hey, we just noticed that you ate a lot this week at these restaurants. You ordered a giant Hawaii pizza. As an example, right? I mean,
I
it's my kids. I
promise.
swear, it was like 2 a.m. My kids were asleep. Swear to God. So I'm just saying, like, there's some sort of the AI could send me on WhatsApp, be like, you don't need to log into an app or over WhatsApp. It basically sends you a message that, hey, we just noticed, blah blah blah. Here's some nice positive message for your start of the day.
I take
Yeah,
photos of my food and I send them to my nutritionist, and my
yeah.
nutritionist's constant comment is, "Fish balls are not real protein. Please eat real protein."
Okay, so when I did those health apps in the US, it always broke down because they couldn't handle Asian food because you're taking a plate of char kway teow. It looks the same as healthy noodles, honestly, but there's a big honking difference. And so from a photo perspective, it's just totally different. They couldn't handle Asian foods, right? So it's just like, you need to go carb less. And I'm like, you need to stop eating potatoes. And I'm like, I don't eat potatoes. I want rice. I want noodles. And they're like, Sorry, our training SOP for our army of human therapists in terms of nutritionists.
Okay, I will
Yeah.
make a shout out though. Novi
Sure.
Health, which is a Singaporean startup, their database has Asian food.
Yeah, there we
So you
go.
can put char kway teow, you can put ramen, and it also has Western food. You can also put like a tuna sandwich or whatever, or bagel. It can do it, but it has Asian food. So
Great to
shout
hear.
out to Suan and Novi Health.
Awesome. Well, that's a +1 to our Monkshill Ventures portfolio company. So thank you for the very kind words. Yay! Check out Novi Health. So yeah, and that's the tricky part, right? But it could be other things. Like I want to really get more into, I think Google and the entire internet algorithms are based on who we were. But I think, who do we want to be? I don't think,
I think if you could put a bot into the group chat.
ooh, like a WhatsApp.
So I mean, I actually like this, and there's a lot of social science research that reinforces this. Changing your context helps you change your behavior.
Right.
So like my college friends, we all have this WhatsApp channel called the Fit Workout or whatever.
Ooh.
And people post their workouts.
Yeah.
And we all live in different geographies. Basically, you wake up and you're like, oh, I don't want it. But then you can see all your friends already worked out that day. And you're like, fine, I'm going to do something. But imagine if there was a bot in that chat.
Right.
So it was like even more active. It was like, Shiyan, don't be lazy. Sarah already did this. And it can even go back and it could be like, why don't you try to beat Sarah's distance or time?
Yeah.
And it can egg you on. But it just makes it makes the passive dynamic a little bit more active.
Right.
To kind of say, hey, and remind you where your goals are and things like that. And I think these are not technically complex, and you could sort of see them becoming ubiquitous, right? Like these little sort of voices that are just like trying to nudge you in a specific direction.
I mean, that's what Fitbit was trying to do, right? They're trying to create these communities, right? So that you could, because at the end of the day, if you're a user of Fitbit, you either could, and it circles back to your point earlier, right? Is the news feed, is that feed of images of people being healthy, for example, is it something to be consumed? Is this a utilitarian perspective? Or is it for a sense of belonging? And the truth is that if you're just looking for that information, both. But you can imagine that, I mean, I think that's the issue, right? It's like historically, every community allows you to consume in that sense, but also to allow you to belong. And so Reddit, for example, when you have bots, is that they're breaking the social contract in the sense that something that you consume was produced by somebody else who also belongs, right? In this case now, the production is done by a bot and the belonging is still another lurker or whatever. So I think there's that breaking of the social compact. But I think that's for the social clubs. But obviously, if you're talking about trying to get fit and you can't find that community, right? Then this is a great, intermediate way to get there or accelerate it.
Yeah.
On that note, any parting ideas you want to shoot out there before I wrap things up?
No, I think these are just always fun exercises to kind of get people's juices flowing on like, when you look around the world, like what do you feel is like pretty broken, and what would it be interesting to go solve? I'm actually curious to hear from the listeners. I would invite them to submit like requests for startups, and we can do an episode with listener ideas and just bat them around a little bit and talk about what would be hard or what would be easy or how do we test it. I think that could just be like a really fun way to exercise our sort of investor brains.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think one thing is wanted to kind of share an event that's happening this week. Right. It's Founders Friends. It's a series that we've run in the US, in San Francisco and New York, and always had pretty good reception on it. It's the first time we're doing it in Asia. It is Wednesday, August 2nd, and we will be interviewing a founder, Max, from Pantas, which is a Malaysian carbon accounting software. He started out as an e-invoicing software and then pivoted into this and has seen really interesting traction. And so would love to invite folks to join us to hear a little bit about Max's story and then meet other founders. And I guess, Jeremy, we can include the Luma link in the show notes for folks.
Definitely.
And if it's successful, then we would love to be able to do more. And I think the goal of these is to have really authentic conversations and not just talk about the raw stuff, but all this other really hard stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a conversation would invite you guys to come join.
Awesome. On that note, see you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.